Hey guys, how's everything going? This is JSer. In this video, I'm going to start a new video series about a relay. Before I have one video trying a demo of GraphQL. So the relay is the GraphQL client that Facebook provides with us. And why I'm interested in relay is that Dan actually mentioned about relay when he's explaining what the concurrent mode of React is. And I've dived into the internals of the React. Of course, not the new reconciler, it's the old one. But I'm curious about, he said, relay actually solved the issue. So what the heck is relay and how did it solve the issues we care about? And I read about the document of relay, and it's actually a little complex. And without some demos, without actual code, I don't know what relay is working about, right? So in these videos, I'm going to build a TODO app, which actually is the official demo provided by relay. And I removed all the functionality. You can see that it's not a TODO app now. It just shows a TODO. Now I'll try to reconstruct this TODO app from my learnings of the relay. So let's begin. Okay, so to begin, I assume that you have the basic knowledge of React and the GraphQL, but don't worry, from the GraphQL part, it's only the basic stuff I can explain to you. Okay, let's begin. So this is a TODO app. Okay, let's take a look at the source code. There's actually nothing there. You see that we get the root and then we render the to-do, actually nothing there. The dependencies are for the future of relay, so let's forget about it. And then we have, okay, this script. First we have a server which will serve the GraphQL, and the relay compiler will compile the relay queries. We'll mention that later. And the bad thing about relay is that use Flow. I love TypeScript. I don't have any emotions for Flow. I don't like it, but relay uses it, so I have to stick with it. Okay, update schema is the how it builds for the GraphQL schema, which the schema actually is here, the schema GraphQL, and it will be served through our server endpoint. And so basically that's it. And this for the front end side, and nothing there. So in this first video, I'm going to try to connect with the GraphQL endpoint and show some data there. So for any web applications, the authentication is the first part, right? So we need to have some token stored in our HTTP only cookie, and then we will extract the user information from that cookie, and then retrieve more data associated with that user, right? So in this first step, we just construct some dummy users and allow the users to switch from two users. Okay, the first one is JSer1, the next one is JSer2. Okay, let's go to our server code. This is our server. Okay, where is it? Server. Oh, this is server code. Okay, we server and then we compile. This is for the demo purpose, so actually we don't need this. The very important part is here, GraphQL HTTP. Actually, we have a schema. Yeah, schema and GraphQL, graphical. It says true, so that we can have a nice debugger, and we will show that right away. And then this server, all the APIs are served from this GraphQL endpoint. Okay, so let's see what actually the data is. The schema, you can see that schema is from data schema. Data schema actually this is graph index, I guess. Yeah, this is the schema. Schema is new GraphQL schema, and it serves only the first one is query. A query is for, you can think of it as kind of get request. It's not a post. It's not to change some stuff. It's just from fetch some data. And this is the root for query. So for query, we support only one query, which is user query, so that we can query for user1, JSer1, and user2, JSer2. Okay, this is a JSer query. So each object is wrapped in this GraphQL object, so that the GraphQL engine knows how to interpret it. It's not plain object. Yeah. So the GraphQL understand what they are and then how they retrieve the data to compose for final data. You will see that in details later. Okay, and this GraphQL, and for this user, we can query user. For user query, user query. For user query, this is an object, and I said type is GraphQL user. And then you have arguments, ID, we can search by ID. You can ignore the syntax here, I don't know that either. But actually, interesting is that it has a resolve function, which actually supports the asynchronous code. So this layer, the GraphQL layer, actually, you can use it as a middle layer and then fetch the real data from the database or from other microservices endpoint. So here we just return a fetch user by ID. And here you just mock some data. I can see I have set up 2 users. The first user is JSer1, it favors TypeScript, and JSer2 favors Flow. This is 2 users, and fetch user is just search through the user scan by the right ID. You can see that, and resolve it. And to mimic the real API behavior, I set a 2 seconds time delay to this function, and so you can guess that for user query, it accepts ID, and after 2 seconds, it will be resolved a new user. The type will be GraphQL user. Let's see what GraphQL user is. A GraphQL user is a GraphQL object type, and it says name is user, and the field is ID, and the resolve. The field has ID, so how can we set the ID? Of course, for the user, we already have the ID, right? So we just get ID by the resolve. And so that's it. And then we actually have a script to build the schema GraphQL. So the entry point is here. Entry point is a schema, then query, user, and this script actually could extract the GraphQL information and generate the schema GraphQL. So this is the schema. You can see that we have query, and with query we can query user, and when we get ID, with passing ID, we can get a user. For this user, we only have ID. Notice that this user is different from the user we have here. The user we have in our database, in the storage, it says we actually have a fav here, right? But actually, it's not exposed. It only exposed as the GraphQL user here. Fields, it only has ID. So the schema only had its ID. So remember, for GraphQL, it's a middle layer between the database or the storage to the user. So for this layer, we need to define what actually the fields we support, right? We can have different name or have different calculations there. So, and finally, this is the right schema for the front end. Okay. So this is it. Because we have enabled the graphical, and let's open the graphical here. Allow me to reload it. Okay, great. So now we have this graphical to debug the real queries. Okay. First we query the user. Remember, the schema is user and passing with ID, right? We have 2 users, JSer1 or JSer2, and we need to use double quote, I guess. For GraphQL, we need to define exactly what we want. Actually, it only has ID, so we passing ID. So we say, I want to fetch the user with the ID. Okay. After 2 seconds, it just returns us with this user ID JSer1, right? If we pass in JSer2, obviously it will give us the JSer2. Perfect. And this is not interesting at all, right? Let's try to add a new field called status. So and obviously we need to modify in the GraphQL user here. So we expose a new field called status type. It's also a string, so we'll copy this and then resolve. How we resolve it? Okay, this is the data from the storage, and this is a string, so we return something different. Okay, I love the fav. Remember, there's a fav here. User query. Its fav is TS, the flow. Okay, so here we expose a new field called, wait a minute, status, and the string is I love, blah blah blah. Okay, but now we update the update schema. Okay, now you can see that the schema is updated. Now the user here is the same for query, but for type user, we are now able to query the status again. So now if we reload it, rather than only the ID, we have the status. Ooh, great. Now you can see that for JSer 2, I love flow. For JSer 1, I love the TS. So this is all for this first episode, the GraphQL part. Let's go back to our app. So our first step is we need to create a user switcher, and before we choose any users, we will show 2 users, and then click any one of them, we will load their status, right? So how should we do it? Obviously, for me, I'll just create an app. Allow me to just render this app. Okay, if it is not GraphQL, I would say that let's say the users, blah, blah, something user and use state now, and then use effect, right? Use effect. Load some user, user. And here return something. If not user, we return 2 buttons. If the user is selected, we get the user, right? Something like this. But actually in the GraphQL, the basic usage of the relay, if we use the useQueryLoader, is actually pretty much the same. It doesn't change so much. Let's try to see what is going on here. Okay, so let's just add a div here. To do. Remove it. So the first idea to query the GraphQL through the relay is that we need to define a query, right? Remember, the user here actually is default to query. It's just query. Not. Did you mean user? What is that? Type query? Okay, I forgot what it is. It's query smaller one. Okay. Okay. Anyway, I forgot it. Okay. Anyway, the first step we need to define a query to fetch some data, right? Oh. Okay. First, define the query. Okay, let's say this is in the app, so we have app query. I think it is GraphQL. This GraphQL is from the relay library, I guess. Yeah, React Relay. And here we have query, and we have some user. We get ID. This is a string. And for the user, we query for the ID, right? No, query ID, no, query, no. This is for, let's say app query, we get the ID, and then it's actually we need to search for the user here. Let's copy the code here, user here, but ID now is become ID, right? So this is the app query, and then we need to build yarn relay. Actually, it will watch that for us. It will generate, I guess, app query GraphQL.js. This is it. And then we actually could, this is the app query. Within this query, we could load this query. And the query could be loaded to get the data. Yeah, in this, okay, and then in this app, let's try to load the query by use load query, I guess. Use load query. Where is it? Use preload query. Use query loader. Okay, use query loader. So yeah, this is one. This is the this is app query. Load, use query loader, and first we need to pass the app query. So this is it. And then the data actually is in a query, but the query has app query has several states. First is it's now when we don't call the load, and so it's now when it is loading. It is now okay to use, but the data is not there. So let's try use effect. We just load it. When we load, the query actually expects some parameters, so we pass in the ID. Let's just say user1, and then but this app query, when we loaded it, it's not the data raw data. We need to extract the data we want. So that's why we need to use the use preloaded data. What is it? Use preloaded query. So the data is loaded, and for this query, and then we extract the data and get the data. It's best by ourselves. So let's create another component called header. Okay, and this header we would return. Okay, we define the props, which is the app query ref. This should be the app query GraphQL, app query type. No, this is preloaded query. Oh yeah, this here is GraphQL. App query. I think it's this big one. Relay A. App query response. There's no app response here. So app query type. Yeah, and then we fetch the query ref here. So if app query is now, which means it's still nothing there, we return nothing. Oh no, we should not return nothing. We need to choose a user, right? So choose. We have a button. Use JSer1 button, JSer2. We unclick, load. Oh, we don't load here. Okay. Wait a minute. Allow me just to return now here. And then if it is not now, we just return the header with the app query ref equals app query. I guess it should be fine. Let's reload it. Ooh, of course. Use relay environment. Expect to have a found relay provider, relay environment provider. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. For the the theme container provider, the useQueryLoader, we need to know how to fetch the GraphQL. So that's why we need this actually in the the environment. So we need to define how we query the GraphQL, right? So yeah, I'll ignore this part, but just we need it just to search for a document for the detailed explanation. But anyway, we now have our environment. We just need to wrap all the app by this relay environment provider. Environment equals modern environment. I guess it should work. Let's reload. Okay, actually I have some typo here. It's our environment. And also this app query, I need to use something like loaded. I don't know. Let me see, ref, use ref here. So if it's ref, let's just use ref here. And then let's see. Okay, now it says nothing is returned. Okay, oh yeah, we hadn't returned nothing here. For the case here, for the header, we get the loaded query. It's being loaded, and then we need to extract the data. So we need to use what? We use preloaded query. So data equals use preloaded query, and we get the app query ref here. oh no, app query and then app query ref. This is the query when it's loaded, and then we need to extract the data, which is from the query ref. I had some problem to naming it, which is query and the record is ref. Maybe I think adding ref is the best approach. Okay, now we get the data. Of course, when it's loaded, when it's being loaded, the data is empty, right? Okay, let's just return h1, say data. Data now, when we use it, we can safely use as user, and then we get data user. Okay, this is ID. Data user status. Great, let's reload it. Ooh, here you see the above error occurred because it's being loaded when we get, because it's here said it's now, it's been loaded, the data user is still empty before the response came. So what do we do? Perfect. Now we see these the goodness of suspense. We say, okay, when it's suspense, it's being loaded, we say okay, this looks good. 2 seconds later, JSer1 loves TS. Great. And if we change it to JSer2, okay, let's change it to loading. Loading, JSer1, JSer2, I love flow. Great. So rather than we return now when nothing is being loaded, we return to buttons to allow me to choose from the two users, right? Okay, let's say this is JSer1, button JSer2, and then on click equals load ID JSer1. Ooh, shit. Looks good. We copy the code. Load JSer2. And then we can just safely remove these user effect. And now we can manually choose which one we want to load it. Okay, just add some space here. Okay, now JSer1, I love TS. Okay, ooh, if we click JSer2, I love flow. Great. So this is the basic flow of our fetching the data from the GraphQL through relay. We've covered useQuery. It's kind of like the other API hooks. It's not that different. The only thing we need to care is that the data we're fetching is not in the raw data. It's in some kind of wrappers, and we need to extract it. So use query. This is the types telling us how to extract the data. This is the real data, the bundle. We get a chunk of data from the GraphQL, and then we apply this rule to it, and then get extracted data. When it's not ready, this was suspense because it was through the promise, and we could use suspense to hold it. So this is it. This is the first episode. Hope it helps. And remember, the graphical is a nice place to test some API endpoint. Okay, so this is a basic one. In the next video, we will cover how we could load the API ahead. Now we just use a query loader. This is after the API app is rendered, right? When app is rendered, and then we click it, and then we fetch the data. But for the API data part, we could separate it and make it better. That's the goal. That's the goal of Relay. So we will cover it next time. And then in the next following videos, we will cover the fragment. And is about how we organize a component together with its own data dependencies. And also we will cover, what is it? The pagination, right? We have a lot of to do how we do the pagination. And yeah, and this is there's another one, I forgot it. Lazy load, yeah, use lazy load. And then, yeah, and then mutation. yeah, we will cover the whole aspect of the TODO app. Stay tuned. Bye bye.